Nicola Sturgeon, the Tory Chancellor, the Labour Shadow Chancellor and the Lib Dem Chief Secretary to the Treasury have all said if Scotland goes independent, you don't get a currency union with what's left of the UK. So what's your plan B?
Well, can I say first of all that these are all politicians who want Scotland to vote no, so it's in their vested interest to stir up as much fear and uncertainty. Their campaign is called Project Fear. They self-styled it Project Fear.
If you leave Britain, if you leave the UK, you leave the pound. So what's your plan B?
I'll come on to that in a second, but the point of the fact here is that what they say now, and this is a point Mervyn King, the former Governor of the Bank of England, made to Alex Salmond, what they say now is very different to what the reality will be if Scotland votes yes.
You don't know that. That's an assertion.
It would be
you don't know that. They could stick to their guns. Let's assume they do stick to their guns, because we're talking about important things here, and we have no reason not to believe them. What's the plan B?
Well, the Fiscal Commission that was asked by the Scottish Government to look at all of the currency options laid out what the currency options for Scotland would be. Sterling within a currency union, which is what we favour, using sterling without a currency union, having our own currency. We want to have a currency union because it's in the best interests of Scotland and the best interests of the UK.
Forgive me, now, but if you don't get that, and it's very important that the people of Scotland and of the rest of the UK know the answer. If they are true to their word, these three politicians from three different parties, what is the plan B for a currency?
Scotland can't be prevented from using the pound. It's a fully tradable currency.
But it wouldn't be a currency union.
Well, but can you let me set out the reasons why I do believe George Osborne is bluffing, why what he will say after Scotland votes for independence, if that's what we do, will be very different to what we say
before you do that, can you tell me? I mean, I really would like an answer to this question, and it's quite a simple one. Assume they're not bluffing. And there are many reasons to think they won't be bluffing, that they'll play even harder ball if you vote for independence. Assume they're not. What would then be the position on the currency?
What I've said is Scotland cannot be prevented from using the currency, but I'm not going to be bullied out of a position that is in the best interests of Scotland and in the best interests of the UK. I know that's what George Osborne wants to try to do, but I'm not going to allow him to do that. Let me go on to the reasons why a currency union is in the best interests of the rest of the UK. The rest of the UK exports into Scotland about £60 billion a year, exports more to Scotland than to India, China, Brazil, South Africa put together. Having a separate currency in Scotland would cost English businesses hundreds of millions of pounds in transaction costs. If we don't have a currency union, the balance of payments for the rest of the UK loses the £30 billion of oil and gas exports. The trade deficit for the UK goes through the roof, which would impact on the value of sterling. These are all hard-headed, common sense reasons why this, frankly, is, as Henry McLeish, the former Labour First Minister of Scotland, a no voter, said this morning, campaign rhetoric, and people shouldn't be fooled by it.
That may or may not be true. My purpose this morning is not to argue with you on the merits of a currency union. I'll try one more time, which is if they don't agree with you, if they think that actually a currency union without a political union, which is what it would be, and we've seen how well that's worked in the Eurozone, if they think that is not right for the rest of the UK, what do you do?
Well, we'll continue to argue for the position
I know that, but what do you do?
Well, I've already said the Fiscal Commission has set out the currency options for Scotland. Sterling is a fully tradable currency. Yes. But with the greatest of respect, just because George Osborne decides to come and lecture and try to intimidate Scotland doesn't mean we should stop arguing.
Why is he lecturing and intimidating? He's laying out a perfectly justifiable case for the rest of the UK to say, if you go independent, we don't want a currency union. It's a perfectly respectable, it may be right, it may be wrong, it's a perfectly respectable view.
With the greatest respect, he's entitled to argue that. I don't question that. But with the greatest of respect, I'm entitled to argue the position I believe passionately and strongly is the best one for Scotland.
Is it true that you've said if they stick to their guns and you don't get a currency union, that an independent Scotland wouldn't take its share of UK national debt?
What I've done is set out a matter of fact. Let me be very clear. I want to see an independent Scotland take on its fair share of the national debt. But if you don't get it, will you not take your share of the UK debt? Assets and liabilities go hand in hand. You simply cannot have a position which I think George Osborne is trying to articulate that says Scotland should be left with a share of liabilities but have no share of assets. So I'm simply pointing out the logical conclusion of his position. I want Scotland to take on a fair share of servicing the UK debt. I'm not the one issuing threats. It's George Osborne that's issuing threats.
But let me clarify. Well, it's not a threat simply to say you can't have the currency of the country that you've just left. That's not a threat. But let me clarify. If you don't get a monetary union, does Scotland renege on its share of the national debt?
As a matter of fact, the Treasury... Well, I want
your view. Not what the Treasury thinks. I want your view.
To pay its fair share of debt. But what I was going to say is, as the Treasury said just a couple of weeks ago, the debt is legally the Treasury's. Scotland can't default on debt that is not legally Scotland's. I think it would be right for Scotland to take a share of the national debt, but that goes hand in hand with the question of a share of assets.
I would suggest you haven't got a choice whether you get the pound or not. Ranald MacDonald, Adam Smith Professor of Political Economy at the University of Glasgow. You cannot get better than that. Who is going to lend to a country? Well, actually, no, you can't. That's where I got my degree. Who's going to lend? And it was the Adam Smith professor that taught me. Who's going to lend to a country where its political leader has already said it's going to renege on a substantial and significant proportion of its debt? You would become a pariah. Never mind the respect. Answer the question. Scotland becomes a pariah if you don't take your share of the debt, correct?
I want Scotland to take a share of debt. I'm simply making the point that assets and liabilities go hand in hand. Now, I wasn't disparaging your degree. I would never, ever do that. But I was
worse, the university.
I was going to quote Sir James Murley's, who was quoted by Mark Carney, who I think taught Mark Carney when Mark Carney was in Edinburgh last week. He's in print in The Scotsman, your former newspaper, Andrew, today, saying exactly why he thinks a currency union is in the best interests of Scotland and the UK. He was on the Fiscal Commission that set all of that out.
Nicola Sturgeon, that's not the issue I'm asking. I put it to you that if you renege, if you go independent and renege on your share of UK national debt, you will be an international pariah on the money markets.
My position is we won't, as you put it, renege on our share of the national debt, because once Scotland votes democratically for independence, if that's what the people of Scotland decide, then the campaign rhetoric will give way to common sense. We will have a currency union underpinned by the proper institutional structures.
You won't answer the question if you don't.
Underpinned by the proper institutional structures that the Fiscal Commission recommended, and Scotland will pay our share of servicing the national debt. That's what will happen.
Why are you so... Well, you assert that, but you cannot prove it, and you take Scotland into the unknown by not answering a single question I've asked you today on Plan B. Why are you so in favour of the pound? The SNP not that long ago described the pound as, quote, a millstone round the neck of Scotland.
We asked a Fiscal Commission with, Joe Stiglitz, a Nobel laureate, Sir James Murley's, who have already quoted, to look at the currency options. Now, there are different currency options that would be open to an independent Scotland. They have recommended...
So you were wrong? It's not a millstone round Scotland, is it?
We have looked at the position. We think because of the trading relationship, because of our contribution to the balance of payments, because of the integrated financial services market, it makes sense for Scotland to remain within a sterling union.
So when Alex Salmond in Spain in 2009 crowed that the sterling was sinking like a stone and the plummeting of the pound reinforced the case for membership of the euro, he was wrong as well.
To judge these things with the prevailing circumstances.
So he was wrong.
At the time, well, the Liberal Democrats fought the 2010 general election on a manifesto commitment to go into the euro. I don't think Nick Clegg would argue that today. You judge these things on the basis of proper information and advice, which we've done through the Fiscal Commission. I'm saying the position we're putting forward now is the one that, in our judgment, is the right one, and there are good, hard-headed reasons why it is the right one for the rest of the UK as well.
Control of its own currency is a country's most potent economic weapon. Do you agree with that?
No, I believe for Scotland the best option is to stay within a currency union.
So when Mike Russell, your education minister and chief executive of your party for a while, it was 2006, not that long ago, when he said there are simply no other methods by which the economy can be finely tuned and geared to meet the ever-changing and accelerating challenges of the information age, a country without its own currency as a country without a steering wheel, without brakes, without an accelerator, he was wrong.
I don't agree with that, because the position I'm putting forward is that based on the advice of the economists that I've spoken of, based on what is in the interests of businesses north and south of the border, there was an opinion poll carried out just at the turn of the year that asked people in England, not whether they thought Scotland should be independent or not, but if Scotland was independent, should we share a currency? 71% of people in England said yes. That's the common sense
That may change when you vote to leave. Let me just one final question. You want a currency union, which would involve the rest of the UK being your lender of last resort, having to bail out the Scottish banks if they get into another mess, as they did only a few years ago. And yet it's also your policy that alone among European students, English students would have to pay full fees at Scottish universities. You want that, And you want us to agree a currency union as well? Why would the rest of the UK agree to that when you want to discriminate against English students?
Tuition fees are actually the policy of Westminster. My position actually is I don't want anybody to pay tuition fees.
No, but you would charge English students, wouldn't you?
That is a position forced upon us because there are...
You won't be charging German, you won't be charging Irish, you won't be charging French or Italian, and yet you want to keep the pound, you want us to be your lender of last resort, and yet you want to charge alone among Europeans full fees to English.
I want us to have a partnership arrangement.
Why would anybody agree to that?
A partnership arrangement on lender of last resort. So let's just put that properly. But on the question of tuition fees, England's got the highest tuition fees in the whole of Europe. If only 10% of students in England came to study in Scotland, that would take up 80% of all places. I wish there weren't tuition fees in England, and I'll do a deal. If the UK government removes tuition fees, they won't be charged in Scotland either. That's a position of necessity. It's not a position that we like.
You better prepare for some very hard negotiations if you want that pound.